Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, BWC 201 Growing and Sustaining Your Body-Worn Camera Program. I'm going to turn it over to Project Manager Denise Rodriguez to make opening comments. Denise?
All right, thank you. Good day, everyone. On behalf of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to the Body-Worn Camera webinar on Growing and Sustaining Your Body-Worn Camera Program. My name is Denise Rodriguez, and I'm a Senior Research Scientist at CNA. I'm also the Project Manager for the Bureau of Justice Assistance Body-Worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance Program, and I will provide the introduction for today's webinar. Today's webinar focuses on what I like to think of as a program or organizational maturation. After a year or two of operations, body-worn camera programs should transform into more complex operations and more confident operations based on the things that they have learned since inception. This, of course, refers to the people managing and running body-worn camera programs. They are the ones who learn and mature with experience, and their learning should be reflected in more sophisticated and successful program operations. That's the topic for today. How does this happen, and what does it look like? What can younger programs expect as they develop and progress? Today's webinar will cover topics such as stakeholder engagement, monitoring policy compliance, managing the technology over time, confronting and resolving challenges, and body-worn camera program outcomes and success. Toward the end of this webinar, I will facilitate a question and answer session and will provide some concluding thoughts and remarks. The technical assistance team members and site representatives we will hear from today include Lieutenant Patrick O'Donnell of the Chicago Police Department. Lieutenant O'Donnell manages their body-worn camera program. He has been with the Chicago Police Department for approximately 21 years and has worked in information services and technology for 13 of those. Lieutenant O'Donnell is currently in charge of technology field services for CPD, including approximately 8,000 body-worn cameras, approximately 2,000 in-car cameras, and over 20,000 street corner cameras, and all technology equipment and infrastructure. He has led Chicago's body-worn camera program from its initial stages throughout its current state of full deployment in the Patrol Division. Deputy Chief Albert Handy of the Camden County, New Jersey Police Department. Deputy Chief Hands developed the agency's body-worn camera policy and managed the research and implementation of the program in 2015. He oversaw the program through a major technology transition to a separate system in 2017 and cultivated the program's process and systems that make the department's body-worn camera program the model that it is today. We also have Chief Calvin Moss of the Woodstock, Georgia Police Department. Chief Moss was sworn in as Woodstock's Chief of Police in May 2012. Following a 30-year career with the Atlanta Police Department, where he retired as Deputy Chief of Criminal Investigations. In that capacity, he was responsible for all major investigations, including homicides, sex crimes, and commercial robberies, and managed numerous units, including the Fugitive Auto Task Force, Gang, Narcotics, Vice, Red Dog, and Homeland Security units. We also have Elliot Harkavy. Elliot is our body-worn camera technology advisor on the technical assistance team here at CNA. Elliot has nearly 30 years experience in Homeland Security, strategic planning, market strategy, competitive intelligence and information technology planning, and operations improvement. Mr. Harkavy has spent 4 years with the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments coordinating law enforcement across the National Capital Region and 8 years with the Department of Homeland Security as part of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Operations Directorate and Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. So thanks to each of our presenters for sharing their time and experiences with us and for working with us on putting this webinar together. This is one in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program and the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit and in the range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. Permit me to make a few other comments before we begin. Please mute your cell phones, and if you're not speaking, this will help avoid background noise during the webinar. The webinar is being recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on the website. And there will be opportunities for questions and participation toward the end of the webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. If you do have a comment or question during the presentation, please use the chat utility to the right of your screen, and we'll do our best to respond. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation, and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And please let us know what other topics you think we should cover on future webinars. Now, let me also thank Samantha Reinerson a CNA who does the background work to make sure that these webinars go smoothly. All right, let's begin with Lieutenant O'Donnell from Chicago.
All right, so just want to talk a little bit about the Chicago Police Department body-worn camera deployment. Currently, we have approximately 8,000 body-worn cameras deployed in the patrol districts. We started a pilot program in 2015 in one small district with several officers, not the entire district. Then we gradually expanded and did phase 1 of our deployment in 6 of our districts. And then by the end of 2017, we had expanded to all of our patrol districts, which are 22 patrol districts. Some of the challenges that we've run into is in our transfers. Like currently, every 30 days, we have the ability for our officers to transfer. We also have our officers that are probationary. They all transfer every 30 days to different training districts. The way that we have set things up initially was to tie the cameras to the district instead of having them tied to the officer. And this simple assignment, by not assigning them to the officers, it causes chaos on change day for us. So we have our officers are switching locations, but they're required to leave the body-worn camera in their previous location, and then we have to go through the process of unassigning, reassigning, and moving those things around. So when you're setting these things up, it seems that it would be much more beneficial to make sure that it's tied to the officer rather than the location. Other challenges we had were in 2018, our original budget and the way we had set everything up was based on a certain amount of officers. It's a very good idea to add some flexibility in there because we hired 1,000 additional officers in 2018, and it caused us problems. So there was no flexibility in our funding. We had to come up with some new camera funding. And also within our infrastructure, in several of our locations, we were limited in space because we had built everything out based on a certain number of officers. So we were literally running out of wall space to put docks in. So it's very important that you leave yourself some flexibility when you're making your initial purchases because you don't know what the future will hold as far as your hiring and staffing. So some of our stakeholder engagement, we engaged in a partnership with the University of Illinois at Chicago, and they did an evaluation of our body-worn camera program in March of 2018 they published. In addition, we hosted several press conferences as our body-worn cameras were deployed. Court, we found that our court system is very focused on video. It's now expected that there will be video, and if for some reason an officer doesn't have a camera or there is no video, then they expect us to explain that. And CPD, from our standpoint, we haven't been very proactive in sharing positive video. That's something that we have to change and we could do a lot better at, is getting some of our positive video out there. Some of our research results, and again, a lot of these were in our initial stages, so they started studying us when we were partially deployed and not fully deployed, so they were comparing some of our districts that had body-worn cameras versus districts that did not. So some of these numbers I would expect would probably change as we do further research. But we found officer positivity greatly increased after the use of body-worn cameras. Our officers initially, especially our older officers, were very skeptical, and then after usage, they found that it was a very positive experience for them, especially when they saw evidence that it helped them. Our community has been largely positive, but really unchanged. They kind of expect the cameras at this point, at least in the study. They weren't really changed from body-worn cameras. They had a positive overall opinion usually, and it didn't seem to really do a change based on the UIC study. We did see a little drop in use of force reports. We didn't see a significant change in arrest, and we didn't really see a change in citizen complaints. However, we did find that we do save time in citizen complaints because the video, many times we can easily dismiss false allegations, and that saves us a great deal of man hours. Officers, we found that our officers are largely compliant with our body-worn camera policy. They feel that the body-worn cameras protect them against false allegations. We are looking for better measures. One of the things that we found, we have our watch operations lieutenants are required to watch one random video per day, and we recently had an IG study of that, and we found that our lieutenants, we needed to give them better direction because they would find the shortest video to look. So they were supposed to be looking at a random video, but to them that meant the shortest video, and usually they would look for an officer that they knew was doing everything the right way so they wouldn't find problems. So we had to, we're looking at right now is changing that process to make it really random, so we're kind of assigning them a video rather than letting them choose. So that's something that, that you can look out for when you're setting these policies up. Police-involved shootings. We have released, in certain situations, so we had an officer-involved shooting in our 3rd district, and we had some civil unrest related to that. The community, the word got out. They thought that, we had shot an unarmed person, and we released the body-worn camera footage that showed the offender actually had a weapon and was reaching for that weapon, had his hand on the butt of the pistol, trying to remove it from a holster when he was shot. So that was helpful for us. We were able to release that video, and it helped us to quell that unrest. Some of the cost versus projections, some of our metrics. Our cost has been very stable due to the structure of our vendor pricing. The way we set things up, it's kind of a set monthly charge, so it's more all-inclusive, so we don't have a lot of variation. So our costs are pretty much right on with what our projections are. As I talked about before, complaints we didn't show, at least in the initial stages. This is, again, something we need to study further. Complaints didn't decrease, but our false allegations can be quickly dismissed. And in 2019, we're asking UIC to look at citizen complaints, again, our use of force, and our officer acceptance since the initial study they did that was completed in 2018. So our performance overall has been very stable. We haven't had any major issues. We just had one, by storing on the cloud, it's been very beneficial to us. We just had one performance issue that wasn't related to the vendor, but was related to cloud storage through Amazon that was like a nationwide outage, but it was very quickly remedied. And the cloud storage has been extremely beneficial for us because the amount of video we have continues to increase. New technology, some of these are cost-benefit analysis that we're going to have to do going forward. Some of the new cameras that are coming out are going to offer live streaming, but that's going to be at a cost, at a greater cost than what we're paying now. GPS and the cost of some of these things, as long as it's a similar cost, we have to kind of weigh whether or not this is going to be a great benefit to us. Although, stabilizing the video and low light performance are things that are promised with new technology, and those are things that we're obviously looking for to improve the video. Upgrading to new models after a multi-year rollout. One of the things we're looking at is, since we did a phased rollout, some of the cameras that we had were ready to be replaced or upgraded, but we found that we're delaying those because we don't want to put 2 different types of models out there throughout our department. We want to stay consistent. So we're delaying that rollout. And what we're doing is, instead of replacing the cameras, we're replacing the batteries, because we're finding that even though we keep them longer than what they've been to be replaced, usually the only thing that's going bad on those cameras is the batteries. And once we replace those, there's no problem in keeping them a little bit longer as you wait for new models to come out. As far as changing vendors, we have not had that issue yet. We're still in the first half of a 5-year contract with our current vendor, so that's an issue we haven't run into yet. So local CPD technology trainers, we found that that's very important to us to have our own trainers. It's increased our flexibility. We're doing most of our training on body-worn cameras in the district on the shift that the officers are working. So we're going to them, and it's definitely been our benefit to have our own trainers. Rapid hiring has forced some of our body-worn camera, like I said, to be in the field, and the footage for training. Again, we've kind of been in a situation where we definitely could use that a lot better than we have been. One of the things we found also with our rapid expansion, we had set aside cameras to use in our academy, and we had to take those cameras and use them in the field just because we had not we had such rapid hiring that we found we had to take them from training to use them in, outside of the training academy. Also, CNA has been hugely beneficial in our policy review. By going through their checklist, utilizing them as a resource, they've been extremely helpful, and we found them as a great resource to make sure our policy was up to speed. And as far as implementing new requirements, usually we're engaging our union leadership, management, labor affairs, and we found that, you know, anything involving cameras, the unions tend to be negative about, but usually they'll say, you know, to the side, well, they're just doing that for political reasons, but they kind of agree with a lot of the usage of body-worn cameras, but they politically, sometimes they'll just protest to show that they're protesting changes within the body-worn camera program. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Deputy Chief Albert Handy from Camden County, New Jersey.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Lieutenant O'Donnell. Let me start off with a quick run-through on the evolution of our program. We started off in the end of 2015 after receiving a grant from BJA. We developed a temporary policy derived heavily from the toolkit and model policy provided by them, and tested it with a pilot program of about 20 officers. Our formal implementation of our policy and rollout to all uniform operations was in June of 2016. So as part of that wider deployment, we immediately experienced some system and device failures. We had reliability issues and device failures from the docks and data transfers to our servers with the volume of data that we were recording. So after many tried and failed solutions by the vendor to remedy those issues, we decided to begin a test and eval period with a different vendor in early 2017. We felt as though the integrity of our system was absolutely critical and needed to move in that direction, that we felt best able to accomplish that. So we did a comparative analysis, got approval for the funding, and then transitioned to a new system beginning in 2018. So our current program is cloud-based storage. We just recently wrapped up the data transition from our initial system. At this point, we have no device failures or reliability issues. We have consistently expanded on our auditing processes and methods. Our program is an integral component of our training and development processes and has been key in drops and complaints, force incidents, officer injuries, and other areas. So let me get into the experiences of our program between then and now. So stakeholder engagement, I'll start off with the body-worn camera administrator assignment. It's a vital function. I was our first. We've changed 3 times since then. We found that you must maintain continuity throughout those changes in personnel. It's something that you need to plan for. We feel it's important to identify the appropriate person. They need to have the ability to dedicate the time and attention to that role, and there's a lot of that factors into those changes and those transitions with logistics, the point of contact for a lot of different entities, prosecutor's office, and things of that nature. The change in admin also we found is also a good opportunity to breathe new life in your program, to do an assessment and identify some areas to improve upon and streamline, etc. Officer acceptance. We found that our officers, it's kind of a love-hate dynamic. They love it when it's a frivolous complaint and the video easily exonerates them, but then they hate it when audits or reviews lead to a discovery of a policy discrepancy that leads to a performance notice. So all in all, we feel our officers have collectively grown to understand the value, necessity, and importance of the cameras. Using body-worn cameras to promote good police work, we use it all the time with training, with our track meetings, which is our version of ComStat, where videos are played on good or poor performance to illustrate and reinforce expectations with the command staff. And then through media, social media, we found it to be a great tool for demonstrating exemplary police work, both internally and externally, particularly with situations where public perception is not great, such as emotionally disturbed persons' interactions. We pumped out a lot of those videos early on. We feel it does 2 things. It demonstrates the challenges faced by officers in those encounters, and also it displays the techniques and the methods and the measures that we take to utilize de-escalation tactics and resolve those incidents peacefully. So under results, we talk about policy compliance. When we started almost 4 years ago, our policy compliance was inconsistent. So some of the reasons were it was new. It took some getting used to by some of the officers, especially older officers. equipment malfunctions, like I mentioned, and, general officer complacency, lackadaisical attitudes, or, some just perhaps being resistant or testing the waters of what they could get away with. So policy compliance was very important to us. So once we had the cameras, there was an expectation that every incident and event is recorded, and when there's not, it can seriously damage the credibility of the agency, particularly in a matter that involves use of force. So it can take an incident where everything was done properly, and there's nothing wrong, and now when there's no video, now introduce an air of impropriety because you don't have video for that incident. So it's a matter that we took very seriously. So the policy compliance was something that worked very hard to get to where we wanted it. And some of the methods used were to gain that policy compliance. We're training, testing on the policy areas, and the main thing was audit processes and following up on those deficiencies with progressive disciplinary action. So at this point, we have a very high level of policy compliance. We also use the body-worn cameras for quality assurance and other policies as well. The escalation tactics, we want to ensure that the training that we're giving in the classroom is transcending the classroom, being practiced in the field. Our uniform policy, things of that nature that is being adhered to, or vehicle inspections are being done properly before an officer goes out on a shift. Things of that nature, it's also a good, valuable tool for that, we found. Our audit processes, we've evolved a great deal as far as how much we audit, who we audit, what we look for. We record about 5,000 videos a week. We currently audit 15% of those videos are done by our supervisors. We also do an independent audit of the audit. As mentioned by Lieutenant O'Donnell, we feel as though some supervisors will take the path of least resistance, and we want to make sure that their audits are being done thoroughly, accurately, and that they're catching and initiating actions on deficiencies or on exceptional performance. So we also have officers that receive 100% audits. These are officers that have been, received some early warning triggers, things of that nature. We look at all of their videos for a period of time. And then we do supervisor video audits. We look at our supervisor videos. It's a quality assurance measure. It's generally just 1 or 2 videos of incidents, usually focused on field interactions with their officers, make sure they're meeting expectations. So our audits are start to finish. We look at activations, deactivations, demeanor, professionalism, tagging, labeling, and other notable issues like proper actions and things of that nature. Okay, other reviews. So we do a use of force review. This is a real-time review by our watch commander in terms of use of force incident. It's a process where as soon as practical after that incident, the officer reports up to the command center. The watch commander reviews the incident and the circumstances, reviews the reports, reviews the body-worn camera footage, and then makes an initial determination whether the incident was within policy and training standards. So it allows us to immediately be on top of an issue and initiate corrective action if there is any. Usually results in no action where everything's compliant and perhaps a recommendation for recognition for outstanding performance. Or is a referral for training for further review or remedial training, or a referral for command level or internal affairs review for policy deviations. So that process also has provided us with the added benefit of avoiding being blindsided with an excessive force issue that we weren't perhaps aware of, and you don't want to see it for the first time on the local evening news. So that process allows us to kind of be in front of that and make sure that those use of force incidents are within policy and training standards. So benefits of our program, complaint reductions. We've seen significant reductions in our overall citizen complaints and other categories. These are not wholly attributed to our body-worn camera program, but we know that it plays a crucial role. Our training, de-escalation methods, and other areas are instrumental as well. But our total external complaints decreased 66% as compared to 2014, which is the year before preceding our implementation. Demeanor complaints decreased 29%. Excessive force complaints decreased 95%. Use of force incidents decreased 56%. And another metric we feel is important to include is officer injuries, which decreased 26% since 2014. Improved practices. We've had improvement and enhancement in many areas and practices since the implementation of our body-worn camera and the availability of that video. So citizen engagement, just overall professionalism and the quality of that type of work and the stops and positive engagement with the community have gotten improved greatly. Our training and development and our early warning systems, I'll talk about that in a few. We've seen some improvements there. Internal investigations, that's obvious. We now have video and audio of the incident and interaction, which shows actually what happened. ATVs, so we have problems with packs of individuals riding dirt bikes and ATVs through our city. Our officers are limited somewhat as far, they can't chase them. There's limited what actions they can take as far as that's concerned, but it's still a concern and problem for us that we can't ignore. So what we've been doing is using the body-worn cameras to record as much as we can, and then using those videos with other technologies like facial recognition to identify the individuals and file tickets or continue that investigation. Investigations, particularly with large scenes. We recently had a shooting incident at a large party, over 100 people there. So we were able to quickly interview and identify a great number of people in an organized fashion so that our detectives could then follow up with those witnesses at a later time. Improved cases for prosecution. We discussed this issue with our prosecutor's office. There's some distinguishable areas where body cameras have helped. Having video at the scene where you previously wouldn't, to record, to have visual of that entire scene for other crimes like burglaries and domestic violence. Statements from victims and witnesses and the corroboration that we get from the video. We don't have any data, but certainly some noticeable trends in pleas and convictions that they've seen. One drawback, however, is many cases have a lot of video, especially if there's multiple officers on scene, so sorting through all of that can be challenging on their end. So it's an area that your prosecutor's office may not have accounted for when you started up your body-worn camera program. Moving on to technology. So equipment performance. At first, like I said, we experienced many problems with our system and the sense of reliability. But since that transition, very few issues. So in that regard, our system is currently meeting all our needs. We found that the phrase, "you get what you pay for," is certainly very fitting with regard to body-worn cameras and based on our experience. Cloud versus server storage, we've had both as part of our program. Our IT folks by far prefer the cloud. They're able to, as they say, set it and forget it. The data is managed by the vendor, and our current plan is for unlimited data, which is very beneficial. Equipment replacements, we had issues with our brackets. They were falling off quite a bit during struggles or foot pursuits. So it's a situation that we had to get rectified. We worked with our vendor, and we were able to make modifications and look at other options, and they found a bracket that worked for us. And we currently have no issues there. As far as changing vendors, just some issues I'll touch on quickly. Just the transfer of the old data, transfer storage of the old data, the archive data. You have to consider what those issues are. Your old system may no longer support that system and that data, or they'll charge you, have to pay a considerable amount for them to continue to manage it. And your new vendor may also likely charge a considerable amount to migrate that legacy data, if it can even be migrated. One thing we did find, though, is after about 6 months, you rarely need to go into that old system to retrieve an older video. Everything is usually processed within a few months, whether it's discovery or audits or training or investigations. That we found that very little do we have to go back in and get video that's in that archived database. At the end of the day, if you're contemplating changing vendors, you're looking at the cost associated with it. I would suggest serious consideration to the value of a reliable system and the value of the credibility of your agency, not just the dollars and cents that go along with it. Training. So we found that a tailor-made training program worked best for us. It covers our equipment, our policy. There's a test based on critical policy points or where we're experiencing deviations or confusion. We found that to be very useful. We use body-worn camera footage for training. We find it to be invaluable. Our training unit uses it frequently during training sessions, one-on-one mentoring sessions. It's like watching an NFL game. It allows us to kind of walk through an event, break it down, look what was done properly, what wasn't, why, what were they thinking, what were they trying to accomplish, and discuss alternate methods and reinforce certain methods and tactics like de-escalation. It also provides a greater perspective on what the issues are that need to be corrected. It's not just, that message, here, train officer so-and-so on X, Y, Z. Now our training unit can kind of look at that officer's videos of the incident and kind of look at what we specifically need to focus on, what specific areas need to be corrected. We found that using body-worn camera for training and development even enables greater acceptance. When the officer or when someone is watching themselves on video, it introduces an opportunity for them to look at the event with a little bit more objectivity. Things often happen fast. They don't realize the errors being made, and it allows them to kind of look and see what they're doing wrong with you. Early warning system. So when we have an officer that is identified through our early warning system, triggers, one of the first things that happen is our training unit kind of goes to the body-worn camera video. They do an assessment and determine a training and development plan for that officer. One of the things that is generally mandated in that training development plan is supervisory mentoring, and we also have those sessions that are recorded with the body-worn cameras. So we want to be able to review those interactions and ensure that the officer is receiving proper direction and leadership and a consistent message as to expectations that's being delivered. And policy review. So we found that a few policy revisions since inception. We found through our program that's need to periodically amend it. Some of the things that we found is that discretion needs to be limited, especially as to what to record and when to record and deactivate. Over the life of our program, we found a lot of gray areas, things that needed to be clarified or loopholes need to be tightened up. And also auditing. So for policy compliance and proper follow-through of the deficiencies, we found it to be a must. So we're consistently expanding and adjusting the scope of our audits to meet our needs. So sustainment and growth, just in summary, a couple things. The administrative position, change is good, allows you to assess, at times breathe new life into. It's not an overly exciting assignment. There's a lot of potential for complacency. The auditing, you could have the best policy in the world, but if you're not checking through your audits and reviewing and following through on deviations, it's going to hurt your program and potentially your agency. And using training and development, it's invaluable when it comes to enhancing our capabilities. For training and development, it's important to note, though, however, that the body-worn camera doesn't tell the whole story or give the entire picture of what's going on in an incident, so your trainers need to ensure that they're taking that into consideration. They're not they're using other video or radio transmissions or other things to draw conclusions. Don't rely solely on the body-worn camera to form those decisions and opinions. So with that, thank you for the opportunity, and please allow me to turn it over to Chief Moss of the Woodstock, Georgia Police Department.
So we'll roll on. Thank you again. Wanted to thank BJA and CNA for their guidance and support as we implemented our body-worn camera program. Woodstock Police Department is considered a medium-sized agency here in the state of Georgia. We began our journey into BJA land, into the body-worn camera land in about late 2016. And our involvement in the program has been informational and educational, I'll say. Like most agencies, I think we began with assessing about 17 different versions of body-worn cameras we landed on, narrowed it down to about 3, and then finally took our top selection and purchased enough of those to deploy to all of our officers who initial response to 911 calls was their primary function. In doing so, we were, frankly, we were happy for a time, and then it got a little bit complicated as about the 12-month mark, we began to have some issues with the body-worn camera. I think we're in good shape. We're going to roll on, if I could, and speak to our stakeholder engagement, which I think was probably one of the best things that we were able to do, and that was to involve key members from throughout the community. We involved not only government and service agencies, but residents, business owners, youth, the elder community, and faith-based organizations to kind of give us a wide voice and input, particularly regarding our policy development. What I think is really important as today's webinar focuses on agencies going into their second and third year of their program is the importance, I think, of that kind of group's input moving forward. I think what we all fear is the very unpleasant situation where we have some video of an officer taking typically use of force type scenario, and that video makes it to national news, and it's played repeatedly. It's important, we think, to have the community involved as much on the front end as is possible, in the hopes that if and when that ever becomes necessary, that at least the process has been open and transparent. We think that's pretty important. So this group provided initial policy input. Huge kudos and thanks to the CNA team on helping to guide us through that initial policy development. One of the things also that we did as we convened this group and we had our community working group together and kind of got their thoughts. We shared with them our plans and our intent. We also held sessions with the officers to kind of keep them posted on what our intent was, get their input equally, and be able to take that into account during the policy development. Initially, the officers were supportive, albeit apprehensive. We did have access to a gentleman who's a professor at a nearby college, and he was kind enough to conduct some pre, mid, and post-implementation surveys, if you will. We also, on the front end, did the initial implementation briefings with the officers, but then about the midpoint, we convened again with the community working group and also briefed the officers on where we stood. And then finally, on the back end, we were able to conduct a quasi-experimental analysis amongst the officers that ultimately indicated throughout the department, regardless of rank or what work unit the officer was assigned to, it was overwhelming, the responses indicating that the body-worn cameras were valuable to the officers' work and performance, to the community, and as well to the prosecution of criminal behavior. So we were very pleased about that. In terms of policy compliance and activations, obviously quality control measures at this point suggest there's general compliance by the officers with the body-worn camera policy. Typically, we find that the officers are activating the camera as they're supposed to. Videos are reviewed for policy compliance, mandatory, following a use of force, following any complaint and or a critical incident. In addition, commanders and supervisors also conduct random reviews of their assigned personnel body-worn camera video. We really kind of try and promote the mindset of inspect what you expect. On occasion, it is discovered that an officer did fail to activate their body-worn camera as required. This obviously can happen when an officer especially responds quickly to an incident or a scene. Help calls can be particularly troublesome, I think, among everything that's going on, the officer remembering to actually activate the video. This often occurs, us determining this failure to activate often occurs during a review of the video for an unrelated issue, such as a citizen complaint or what have you. Thus far, we have not experienced any repeat offenders. Personnel actions have been very much limited to counseling and low-level discipline thus far. As far as body-worn camera benefits, we believe they've been extremely beneficial. We see that on a number of fronts. Quantitatively, citizen complaints have decreased significantly since implementation, and all indications are that the community perception of both the project and the department have remained solid. Prosecutors like the body-worn camera video. We have seen some increasing challenges in the courtroom setting, where anymore it seems as if jurors expect to see video. This is particularly true, we think, in roadside arrests or especially driving under the influence cases. And in that regard, body-worn camera video has been immensely helpful. We did have some opportunities to improve our practices through training, ultimately that were precipitated by supervisor reviews of the body-worn camera video. It's been especially helpful with reviewing a use of force, particularly if there's a complaint, reviewing the video with the officer, and I think the training and development, as my colleagues mentioned, comes into play at that point, and I think the video is priceless at that point. Also, one of the things we found that we didn't really expect on the front end was that the importance of the body-worn cameras for detectives, especially for their crime scene responses and initial walkthroughs at crime scenes. Tracking the cost-benefit analysis, tracking results, while I think it's difficult to estimate the full benefit to the cost for the project, I think if one only must consider the personnel hours, legal costs, and time spent on a single lawsuit, that can be very easily cleared up by the presence of body-worn camera video. Those of you who might have been around during the time that the in-car cameras were initially implemented. Body-worn cameras, I think, are very much similar in respect when we get a complaint. One of the things that's very satisfying, frankly, to be able to do is to offer the complainant an opportunity to come review the video with myself or one of my commanders. And in most cases, the complaint is withdrawn immediately following that, or the citizen simply doesn't even take that opportunity to come down and review the video. In terms of the metrics that we've talked about in the annual project costs, our initial implementation costs for equipment, software, and storage totaled roughly just over $2,000 per officer per year. We unfortunately went through a period about 12 months into the game where we had such a significant failure rate with the cameras and the service with the initial vendor that we chose. We ended up opting to change vendors, more on that later. But with the transition to our current vendor, the cost, which includes video storage, we're actually able to reduce to just over $1,200 per officer per year. Ongoing expenses we estimate to be about $12,000 annually, or $240 per officer per year. We'll talk a little bit about our storage solution, which is a little different than the large agencies, I think, and has helped us keep that cost down a little bit. In terms of complaints, citizen complaints have decreased. Citizen complaints overall on patrol officers have decreased roughly 50% as comparing the 2018 numbers to the pre-body-worn camera 2016 data. Of particular interest, I think, is that sustained citizen complaints, or those with sufficient evidence to prove the allegation, dropped by 66%. I think, not surprisingly, in-house complaints increased after implementation of the body-worn cameras, largely due to new and more regular observation of officer conduct by supervisors. The reduction in complaints, I think it's noteworthy that it's inversely proportional to the 4% increase in calls for service and 10% increase in population and arrests when comparing the pre to post implementation data. And again, our research indicated, at least from the officer's perspective, that the body-worn cameras were indeed valuable to their work and performance, to the community overall, and to their ability to prosecute criminal conduct in court. Equipment performance and technology. Again, as I alluded to, failures with our initial vendors' equipment increased throughout year one. Most of those failures involved automated triggers that would not operate correctly. They would simply get out of sync between the body camera and the in-car video. By the 12-month mark, we made the decision to transition to a new vendor, replacing all of the body-worn camera equipment. Since that change has happened, we've experienced less than a 5% failure rate, and when needed, the customer support and service has been very, very good. We opted to go with an in-house storage solution as opposed to the cloud. We found that to be cost efficient on our end. Of course, our IT folks, as was alluded to earlier, would probably have preferred the in-house, but that unfortunately was not to be. So their preference, would have been for the cloud, and we ended up using the in-house storage instead. Obviously, technology continues to evolve. We have not made that any changes to the current vendor, which was our second, but we're very pleased with that, and it's our intent to remain with them through the overall transition to new in-car cameras before we consider upgrading or changing the current body cameras. I can say that with regard to changing vendors in midstream was both very costly and quite unpleasant. In addition, unless an agency is positioned to purchase all new equipment at one time, which we were not, running two parallel systems until the transition is complete can be challenging, and we've certainly faced that. I would urge anybody thinking about moving to a new vendor or replacing cameras to obviously think long and hard about it. But at the end of the day, each of our agencies have to determine what they're most comfortable with and what actually works for them long term. As far as training goes, the body-worn camera training curriculum, I would emphasize that form follows function. I think it's critical that a training curriculum be developed that's tailored to the specific agency's needs and use. We did training throughout the implementation process with our officers, and there's a number of issues, obviously, that have to be addressed, not the least of which are the practices and protocols for the policy. I would urge anybody in this position to take note of any state laws governing consent, evidence, privacy, public disclosure. And then there's the technical or more tactical side of the training, where the hands-on procedure for officers to actually operate the equipment safely and effectively. I believe that as far as an in-house expert, for us, it has our in-house expert, who happens to be a corporal, has been worth his weight in gold, resolving minor technical problems or malfunctions. We're able to get most issues resolved without even having to go to the vendor for additional help or assistance, though that has, in those cases where it's required, it has been satisfactory, the service that we're currently now getting. It also helps to have this in-house expert, we think, to kind of monitor the system use, handle the software or firmware updates in coordination with the vendor, and then ultimately the interface with the vendor's reps. That has helped us immensely. It's been our experience that body-worn camera video provides opportunities for additional training. Officer performance, whether it's substandard or particularly noteworthy for that matter, can be addressed using actual body-worn camera video. And whether an issue is identified by command, a supervisor, or the officer themselves, these issues should be addressed through periodic and documented roll call training. That's been something we feel pretty strongly about on our end. Finally, as I wind down, the formal policy review. I think the policy itself has to be annually reviewed along, I hope, with everyone's all their policies. But for us, the TTA team at CNA, they were immensely helpful in helping us to anticipate challenges and be able to develop a solid policy on the front end. I think it's important, again, to emphasize any state law changes. Here in Georgia, for instance, state law sets the minimum retention periods for body-worn camera and in-car video. Just as a side note, video is retained for 180 days from the date of the recording, except involves criminal investigation, vehicular accident, shows a detainment or arrest, or a law enforcement officer's use of force, in which case it must be retained for 30 months. And the same is also true if there's pending litigation expected or in the top end. That concludes my portion of the webinar. On behalf of my fellow presenters, I really want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. If there's anything that we can ever do here at Woodstock, please don't hesitate to reach out. Before I turn the floor back over to Elliot, I just really, again, Elliot will pick up the Q&A and wrap up, but I want to thank again DOJ and BJA for the funding assistance, and huge kudos out to CNA's Dr. Carrie Shelton, Chief Harold Medlock, and Tom Woodmansey, and the entire CMA team for their guidance and support. Elliot, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chief Moss. I'm here to talk about technology aspects of an ongoing program, what the agencies should be considering, or what many agencies are considering. So as body-worn camera programs grow, program managers may want to consider their needs around cybersecurity, supporting technology, upgrades, and future technologies. Now, cybersecurity is an essential part of systems administration. It includes, but not limited to, regular systems backup, managing systems access, and ensuring that key security patches are installed when they're available. So there's a statistic that I found that 80% of cyber attacks could have been prevented had existing security patches been implemented. Please note that there were reports last year of security flaws in a few of the vendor systems. Those announcements were followed by announcements of patches from those vendors, those flaws. So it's important that you work with your information technology team to ensure that proper cybersecurity measures are being maintained on all of your agency systems, especially your body-worn camera systems. Supporting technologies could include computer-aided dispatch integration, automated triggers, online video transmission, video analytics and artificial intelligence, and redaction. Automated triggers initiate body-worn camera recording when certain conditions are met, such as drawing a weapon, initiating lights and siren or exceeding a threshold speed, being within a set radius from cameras, or being within a given geofenced area. Most vendors offer some version of automated trick, but there are downsides to these technologies. As Woodstock mentioned, there's the potential of failure of these automatically activate. There can be inappropriate activation or accidental deactivation. An inappropriate activation might be an officer going by the police station with lights and siren, which would have activated that officer's camera and could activate any camera within the associated radius, which is like 30 or 60 feet. So we have heard reports of all the cameras in a police station going on in that circumstance. Accidental deactivation could occur when the camera is activated automatically, but the officer doesn't. And with some systems, that hitting the on button again can turn the camera off. There's also concern by some agencies that the officers will rely on the triggers rather than initiate the activation themselves. There are some lower technology alternatives that some agencies prefer. One that's used often is just the dispatcher reminding officers to activate their cameras at multiple points during a dispatch call. The agencies add those reminders to the dispatch scripts and have been getting good results. There's a lot more information about automated triggers that we've put into commentary. The link for that is on the screen, and if you email us at bwca@cna.org, we'll be happy to send you that link. CAD integration links body-worn camera data with your computer-aided dispatch records and records management system data. It links the body-worn camera video to the dispatch call and, if applicable, case files. It can help automate tagging and categorization for some, if not most, videos, and it can also be used to track policy compliance. Most for some version of this, but the effectiveness will be impacted by your technology on the body side, on the computer-aided dispatch side, as well as your dispatch policies. Match rates have ranged, that we've heard of, ranged anywhere from 30% to over 95%. We have a lot more information on this in our 2018 webinar. The link for that is on the screen, and again, if you email us, we'll be happy to send you for that. Online video transmission is another technology that established programs start looking at if they don't already have it. It allows the transmission of videos to your prosecutors, to other partners, potentially to the public or the media as well, via secure links or shared systems. This can save you a lot of time and expense versus putting videos on media like CD, DVD, USB drives. This is standard on some vendor systems. Other vendors have it as an option. But a key component on this is the willingness and the ability of partners to use these online transmissions. It may require negotiation with your partners, but the saving time, effort, and expense may be significant enough to move that forward. Video analytics and artificial intelligence are part of technologies that often come bundled with some vendors' products or come as separate software packages. They can agencies get a lot more from their video, including accelerating the review of the video, facilitating forensic analysis, finding key evidence, identifying witnesses, or identifying deviations from the norm. Some analytical tools use artificial intelligence to allow for functions including audio transcription, language translation, pattern matching or pattern diversions, or tracking of items or objects or vehicles and or people. One of the uses for video analytics is in the use of redaction tools. These tools use many of the analytic techniques that I just mentioned to accelerate redaction. Items such as pattern matching and pattern diversions, or tracking of items, objects, vehicles, or people can really help accelerate your redaction. However, the current systems can do most of the work, but not all of the work. It is essential, even if you're using the latest and greatest redaction tool, that after you use the tool, you review frame by frame to ensure that the redaction is complete. If they leave some unredacted frames, which may leave witnesses or other innocent people at risk. Now, some agencies, instead of doing the redaction in-house, will hire services to do it. This can be effective, but it also can be expensive. If you're interested in this, consult some of your partner agencies, some of your surrounding agencies, to see if they've used any local or national agencies for it. I've even heard of some large partner agencies providing redaction as a service for fee from some of their surrounding smaller agencies. So the next thing I want to talk about are upgrades, and we heard a little bit about this from all three of the agencies that preceded me. Among the opportunities for upgrade are new cameras, storage options, and digital evidence integration. As we heard Chicago mention, vendors will periodically introduce new cameras with all sorts of new whiz-bang technologies, but agencies really need to look at those upgrades and identify if and when the new cameras justify replacement. Will the new features of the new cameras have a real impact? Will there be unintended consequences from an upgrade? I've heard of one agency that found the new features of a new camera. They really liked those, but they missed some features from the older cameras that were no longer available. So really, kick the tires before making any upgrades. Now, some vendors will include periodic part of service contracts, so that may entice a periodic replacement. But please remember, as we've heard from a couple of the agencies that preceded me, issuing new can be complex. It requires planning, testing, and training, and it may also require some policy adjustments. Similarly, next slide, storage options may change over time, as Camden and Wood discussed. Vendor changes may drive storage changes, or agencies may need to expand or mirror local storage. They may need to move from local storage to the cloud, or vice versa. They may need to supplement local storage with cloud archive, and they may need to move between providers. Just like the cameras, or even more so than the cameras, porting the videos will be complex. It will require planning, testing, and training, and it, again, may require policy. Moving on to the next slide, digital evidence integration is a process which combines all your digital evidence files, or some major subset of your digital evidence files, into a common repository or system. Such evidence could include body-worn camera video, dash cam video, closed-circuit TV video, cell phone dumps, PDFs, and all sorts of other digital data. Using digital evidence integration allows the evidence to be viewed in one place. It provides a consolidated evidentiary view of a given case. It also can increase productivity, ensure accurate linkage of videos to other evidence, provide for enhanced evidence tracking, and ensure that all involved have a full picture of the case being made. Now, more information on digital evidence integration in our January 2019 webinar, and the URL is again on the screen, and please email us if you'd like us to send you that URL. So moving on to the next category, we have some future technologies that are starting to be out there, or at least under discussion by agencies, that are certainly worth considering. Moving on to the next slide, live streaming is something that a few vendors are starting to offer, and others are promising it for future releases. This allows you to broadcast live video from a body-worn camera to specific recipients. The use cases on this are not quite clear, beyond providing some situational awareness for complex operations like a large tactical operation or some sort of major event or major incident. Likely, at most, it would only involve a few select cameras, but it's something that is a promising new technology that people are talking about. Sensors on the cameras are something that, again, some vendors already offer and are talking about, It provides information to officers, dispatch, and or commanders about the situation the officers are facing and helps to inform decisions. Some examples of the sensors being discussed already are tracking officers' locations and providing that back to dispatch and commanders, identifying injured officers, or identifying fired. And when these sensors are triggered, an alert would go to either dispatch or commanders to let them know that the sensor has been triggered and allow for actions to be taken. Finally, something that is very often talked about is facial recognition, which allows people to be identified against photo databases. It can allow the system to identify potentially dangerous people, to apprehend people, potentially rescue abductees. It's currently used in some body-worn cameras in Asia, and it's also used very often on European closed-circuit TV system. But it is very controversial here in the United States. It can be an extremely powerful law enforcement tool, but when U.S. vendors discussed adding facial recognition, they were met with significant protest. I believe there was one joint statement issued by 45 different civil rights groups opposing the use of it. Cisco, just a few weeks ago, banned any use of police facial recognition, and many cities and a few states are considering similar legislation. The major issues being raised by the advocates against this technology are concerns about privacy and equitable treatment of people. So it holds a lot of promise, but one may want to do their research before moving forward. In any case, I'd like to now hand this off to Denise Rodriguez to facilitate questions and answers.
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you to Lieutenant O'Donnell, Deputy Chief Handy, and Chief Moss. So we'll now open it up to question and answers. If you have any questions, please do submit them through the chat function. It's on your lower right-hand corner. We have received a couple questions thus far. One is if you guys can expand on the cost of film processing and public information requests. So what have your experiences been with those two issues?
Okay, so this is DC Handy from Camden County. As far as OPA requests or Freedom of Information requests for video, we haven't gotten that many. I was actually surprised. I was expecting to receive them for a great more than we did. We only have received maybe a few dozen a year. So as far as the costs are concerned, they're pretty minimal.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Lieutenant or Chief Moss, any additional comments?
Hey, Moss here at Woodstock. Only thing I would add, I think, is that most of what we have seen has really kind of gone along with discovery on an open court case. So while open records can be challenging, to say the least, we've not really had major challenges yet to being able to manage the influx of video requests. It really has not been inordinate thus far.
And from Chicago, we haven't received a ton of FOIAs. Again, it just like the chief said, most of ours has been, part of court cases.
Thank you. The other question we received during the webinar is, what audit process have you found successful? Open it up to Lieutenant or Deputy Chief or Chief Moss if you have any feedback.
So you're asking what audit process? Is that the question?
Yes.
You cut out.
Yes. What audit process have you found successful? And I realize that this is very, it's got to be tailored to your agency. But I guess if you can go into some detail as to what process your agencies follow and how has that been successful?
Yes, ma'am. So what we have done, and again, we're simply a medium-sized agency, so we wouldn't have some of the challenges perhaps that my colleagues in Chicago or at Camden County might have in terms of volume. But, we mandate a review of all the body-worn camera video when there's a use of force. That's a use of force report, because there's also a report required on behalf of the officer. Anytime we receive a complaint or if there's any kind of a critical incident as well. That has worked reasonably well for us thus far. We do random checks, so the commanders are expected to do random checks of their assigned personnel, and we're struggling at this point with whether to require a percentage of the video or X number per week. So that's been a little bit challenging for us.
So in Camden County, we do 15% of our videos are audited by supervisors. Then, like I said, we do an audit of the audit because we want to make sure that it's being fruitful. It's not an exercise of just to kind of go through the motions. That it's catching deficiencies. It's looking at the proper videos, and that there's actions being taken to correct what they're saying, or to put officers and recognize officers for good performance. But we do have some officers that we put in 100% video audits. If they receive early warning triggers or other reasons, we review all their videos for a period of time to make sure that we get them up to speed.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Handy, we've actually gotten some questions that are specifically for Camden County. So in Camden County, do each officers have their own camera?
Yes, they do. Each officer has their own assigned camera, but they do leave it here. We don't allow officers to take them home. They have to dock it. And we have checks and balances where we have staff to go in and just make sure that everything's accounted for. Everyone has their own slot in their we got enough docks to make sure that each camera can be docked at the end of the shift. So yeah, every officer is assigned their own. And we rarely, at one point we were having, with our previous vendor, having to exchange a lot of videos, because if something went down, we'd have to give them a new camera to get back in the field. So there was a lot of transition, but we don't have that anymore. So pretty much officers, we have a lot of continuity with their devices right now.
Okay. One more question for you. You mentioned earlier that officer injuries went down. What is, and is there a correlation with the body-worn cameras?
It's, I would say, a contributing factor. I wouldn't say that it's solely because of body-worn cameras. I think that the presence of body-worn cameras has resulted in overall less adversarial confrontations, I would say, with regards to like stops and arrests. Everyone tends to behave a little better when the cameras are rolling, so that's not always the case, but usually. So we've seen that trend when we implement our program. But really, I think it's really enhanced our training capabilities. We're able to now use the camera to drive home tactics and methods and things like de-escalation strategies and positioning and things like that, so that we can ingrain those things more effectively. Also, probably overall policy compliance. So when you look at things like pursuits or responding to calls for service, emergency calls for service, things like that. So there's other policies where the body-worn camera comes into play. You know, officers tend to stay within policy standards as it relates to those other policies. So we see, like, for example, that can have an impact on motor vehicle accidents, for example, things of that nature.
Thank you. Chief Moss or Lieutenant O'Donnell, anything to add?
Only one quick thought, if I could. Moss here in Woodstock, we too have assigned the body-worn cameras to individual officers. We require them to dock the camera at the end of their shift so as to facilitate uploading of all the video that they have. However, we do permit them to take them home, and they have car chargers as well, as our officers are permitted to work extra duty jobs or secondary employment, and we do require that they have the body cameras with them and activate them on an extra job, just as if they were on duty.
Same for us. In Chicago, we assign them to individual officers. We don't reassign, and I think that's also part of our the way we purchase them and pay for them is license per camera per officer. So we have to one camera, one officer is the way we have to do it.
One thing I might add, we're currently trying to solve this on our end, and we're fortunate that we had purchased a few extra cameras, but there will be times where the equipment goes down, and there may be a slight delay in getting a replacement camera or part from the vendor. So we actually had 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever the case was, spare cameras in the event that one goes down. Not unlike a patrol car. If one goes down, you still have to have one. You wouldn't want to risk an officer out there without the camera.
Thank you. All right, I think that's all the questions we have received thus far. If any of our attendees do have additional questions, please email them, and we will be sure to respond. As you've heard, there are some common themes in the challenges and successes that these three sites have experienced, and learning from agency experiences is a primary objective of the Body-Worn Camera TTA program. So although there are some common themes, I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind that the context in which the body-worn camera programs are being implemented. So what works for one agency may work differently for another. So before we close, I'd like to pass this off to Chip Coldren, who's our body-worn camera training and technical assistance director, and see if he has any closing comments.
And thank you very much. First, just let me offer my thanks to our presenters today. And I think we heard a good recitation of experiences and collective learning across these body-worn camera programs. As I was listening, I came up with, I think, maybe 3 points I'd like to emphasize. First, I hope participants heard and learned that you can actually manage how things go in your body-worn camera program. You obviously can't control everything, but you can manage public expectations. You can manage officer expectations. You can use training to enhance compliance with policy. And you can actually move to more sophisticated compliance monitoring as you mature as a program. Another thing I think I heard today is that everything changes, right? Equipment and options change. Sometimes vendors change. System integration is changing, expectations change, policies are living documents that change from time to time, and you work with laws and ordinances that change from time to time as well. So nothing is really very static. You're operating in an environment of change. Also, I think we heard about some ongoing challenges. So keeping pace with technology, I think, is an ongoing challenge, or maybe the way to say it is to try to convince others in your agency to not follow every trend in the technology all the time. But I think the pace of technology is a challenge. Continually learning how to work better and collaborate better and share information better with prosecutors and the courts is an ongoing challenge. This whole notion of the growing body of stored evidence and the integration of body-worn camera evidence with other digital forms of evidence is an ongoing challenge. I think many departments experience internal challenges regarding acquiring the staffing and resources that are necessary to run these programs. I think there are some ongoing challenges regarding assessing the impact of these programs and keeping the training fresh. So those are just a few things I thought I heard today and that I picked up on as I read through the presentations. And then as I was putting these notes together, I thought, my goodness, this is what technical assistance is all about. It's not just about implementing a program, but it's about working with agencies as programs grow and mature and expand. So I just encourage everybody to consider how our assistance can be helpful to you, and we want to be helpful, and I know John Markovic would repeat that as well, that the whole rationale for this program is, at least a main rationale, is to be helpful to the local jurisdictions. Those are my thoughts for today. Denise, thank you very much for the opportunity, and John, I'll hand off to you.
I think you're on target. I think definitely the presentations were very grounded, gave us some real experiences of the ins and outs of implementing the body-worn camera program in the real world, hearing from agencies of different sizes. And I appreciate all the kudos given to CNA for being flexible and accommodating and meeting the agencies where they're at. We've got agencies of various sizes, various levels of previous technological sophistication. So I think for us at BJA and for CNA, this is a learning process. I think we benefit from these webinars, both sort of as a peer-to-peer exchange, as a learning experience for new agencies. So I'm hoping that some of the agencies on the call that participated are able to glean some useful insights, and they're always available to reach out for TTA, even if they aren't grantee agencies. We'd look to vet those requests and accommodate them as much as possible. So thanks again to CNA for putting out another well done and informative webinar.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you, John. So we've got a slide with some resources up on the screen. Again, feel free to take a look at the body-worn camera toolkit on BJ's website, our website, a getting started guide, and again, as Chip and John have mentioned, we've got a number of subject matter experts available. And if you have any questions or need any assistance, please do send us an email. And thank you again to our speakers and to everyone listening in. Have a good afternoon.